In East Africa, importers and exporters will now have more options for their goods as two new ports begin operations and challenge the dominance of Kenya's Mombasa port. In Nigeria, some recent rumblings in the banking sector have people asking just how healthy the industry is. From the mergers and acquisitions of the early 2000s to the economic realities of today, we're looking at Nigerian banks. And while we've seen technology helping bridge the financial inclusion gap, there is an issue for borrower beware with the proliferation of loan apps across the continent. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Let's start with the African business headlines. The National Telecom Regulatory Authority has announced that it is fining all mobile operators in Egypt 21 million Egyptian pounds for their low-quality services during the second quarter of 2022. The National Center for Quality Control of Communication Services at the authority issued its report for the quarter, saying that the fines came within the framework of a number of measures taken by the NTRA to raise the quality of mobile services. The Nigerian government has approved $2.59 billion for the development of the Badagry Deep Sea Port project under a public-private partnership. The Minister of Transportation, Muazu Sambo, explained that under the Build, Own, Operate, Transfer, Delivery system, the port would be operated by the private sector for 45 years, after which it would revert to the government. Kenyan traders risk a fine of up to 500,000 Kenyan shillings or a year in jail if they fail to register online for clearance of all imports and exports as the state moves to plug loopholes manipulated to ship in or export products. This follows the creation of the National Electronic Single Window System, which is now the only entry point to register and clear all inbound and outbound cargo. And Zambia's currency, the kwacha, advanced to its strongest level since September after the country's official creditors agreed to provide financing assurances to the nation as it needs to secure final approval from the International Monetary Fund for a $1.3 billion bailout. The kwacha gained as much as 2.4% to 15.975 against the dollar, making it the second best performing currency. The country's $1 billion of euro bonds due 2024 advanced for a 10th straight day, rising as much as 0.3% to 60.9 cents on the dollar. Competition is coming to the ports business in East Africa. We'll have the details after the break. There's a port battle brewing in East Africa. Now, Mombasa Port, the biggest port in the region, receives an average of 3,000 containers daily. The port serves as a crucial gateway to Central and East Africa, connecting countries such as Uganda, Burundi, Somalia, and also receiving ships from Western Europe, the Americas, and East Asia. With a new port in Lamu, just 341 kilometers away from Tanzania, which became operational last year, and another being built in Bagamoyo, Tanzania, the dominance of Mombasa Port may be coming to an end. The Bagamoyo Port in particular will present a very staunch challenge. The $10 billion project backed by China and Oman, if completed as planned, will have the capacity to process 20 million TEUs. Joining me now from Nairobi, Kenya is Ken Kichinga. He's the chief economist at Mentoria Economics. Ken, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Tolulope.
So we know that the Mombasa port is the largest in East Africa, one of the largest here on the continent as well. But it always hasn't been the case when it comes to this very vital port. So let's start in terms of establishing its own importance. It's had its challenges and then has led to some kind of rehabilitation to where it is now. So what developments really led to the port improving to the current conditions we see?
Well, for a long time, it's been considered to be the gateway for East Africa. It's the largest port in East Africa. and it's the second largest port in Africa in terms of throughput. It handles about 3,000 containers daily and about 2.65 million TEUs. These are 20-foot equivalent units. This is the terms they use in logistics in terms of how many containers pass through the port. So it's of extreme significance, but you're right, there is new competition coming from Lamu, from Bagamoyo, and the port will have to find new avenues of reinventing itself.
So how critical is it to the Kenyan economy, Mombasa port that is now, and even to the larger economy? In calling it the gateway, we really give it a lot of importance and a very interesting pride of place, as it would be. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, historically, a lot of people don't know that Mombasa was Kenya's first capital city before Nairobi. That's where the trade coming from the Arab world was transacting. It's now Kenya's second biggest city, and it just doesn't serve Kenya alone. It serves a lot of the landlocked countries in the region. So the Ugandas, the Rwandas, the DRC. So it has been a corridor that has been facilitating goods and services moving into those hinterland regions. And I think the conversation right now is how can it be upgraded to keep in touch with global competitive standards.
So let's look at one of the ports that's going to be providing some competition, and that's the Lamu port, which started receiving ships after its first berth became operational just last year. There are also two other berths that are coming on stream quite soon. But while it's in the early days, what does business look like? How are things shaping up for the Lamu port?
Well, it's very strategic because it has, first of all, the size. It has very deep berths. Very wide berths, about 400 meters wide. So it has the capacity to handle very large ships coming into the region. Second of all, it's part of a greater corridor called the Lamu Port LAPSSET project, which really connects the whole corridor of Kenya into Ethiopia, into Southern Sudan, which has been neglected in many years. So lots of opportunity for pastoralists to be able to move their livestock in countries like Oman. So it's opening up a whole new corridor that had been neglected in the past.
So I like the mention of Oman you had now, because I mentioned them in my introduction, and that takes us to the Bagamoyo port, which is backed by China and Oman. So let's first look at the backers. What interest do you think China and Oman have in a Bagamoyo port? The strategic location, the ability to move certain items, what is it?
Well, obviously, I wanted to step back and look at China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's the grand architecture that connects China to many countries around the world, not least the Oman and Tanzania corridor. So China is really pushing for the development of that Bagamoyo port. About $10 billion have been committed towards developing it, and really in the fullness of time will be much bigger than Dar, about 25 times larger than Dar, much larger than Mombasa. So in a sense, one would say China needs the two corridors. It needs the Mombasa corridor and it needs the Tanzania corridor to be able to transact with the continental interior Africa.
So let's talk about some of these corridors as you talked about. There's also the Dar es Salaam Maritime Gateway Project, and that's a $42 million development by the World Bank, the United Kingdom Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and also the government of Tanzania. It's quite interesting to see a lot of this development and construction of these corridors in East Africa. Why are we seeing a lot of attention there? I know, unfortunately, with West Africa now, there's the piracy conversation happening in the Gulf of Guinea that has moved from East Africa many, many decades ago. But now there's this sort of revitalization and rehabilitation and, of course, just construction we're seeing in East Africa with the port system. Why do you think that's happening now?
Well, I think there are two layers to that discussion. I think the first layer is just the countries themselves, Kenya, Tanzania. They want to be able to really transact more in terms of trade volumes between those two countries. and particularly in the interior. But I think from foreign countries like China, I think it's really getting to the heartland of Africa, which is countries such as DRC, and really being able to have avenues to be able to transact, particularly with the minerals there. DRC is blessed with quite a number of natural resources. So to be able to have good avenues that can be able to really push cargo into the interior and out of the interior with relative ease, I think that is the long-term game plan.
So, okay, let's circle back to the ports of Mombasa now. With these developments, new ports coming in, a lot of money, deeper and wider berths as well. Do you really see the port of Mombasa being displaced as the preferred port in East Africa anytime soon?
I don't think it'll be something that'll be easily done because, as I said, Mombasa has almost well over a century of historical relationships. Many companies have built their business models around Mombasa. Many families have cargoes that are tied. So there's a whole socio-economic fabric that has been tied into Mombasa that really can't be wished away. I think what's likely going to happen is sort of like the new businesses might say, okay, Mombasa appears saturated. Let's look at Lamu. Let's look at Bagamoyo. So I think these new ports will sort of handle the newer businesses coming in, but I expect the legacy businesses that have been there for hundreds, for decades, I think those ones will still continue to be anchored on Mombasa unless something fundamentally drastic happens.
What would have to be that fundamentally drastic thing? What kind of scenario would that be?
Well, that's a difficult question, Tolulope, but I would imagine anything maybe that touches on the costs. Logistics is a very cost-sensitive industry, and if the costs can continue rising, because one of the things is the Kenya Revenue Authority, really in partnership with the Kenya Ports Authority in Mombasa, have really tightened that particular avenue, and it's becoming very expensive to be able to move goods. So if people believe that it might be cheaper to move products through Bagamoyo, or it might even be more efficient to move products through Lamu, I think that's one of the things that could change. Another angle might really be around the security corridors. If Lamu for a long time has been really under that pressure from Somalia and Al-Shabaab, if the government can secure that area and people believe that Lamu is extremely safe to do business, you might see people actually preferring to move their cargo up there because their insurance on those products premiums might go down if the risk factor goes down. So it would need to have some structural changes would need to happen before Mombasa is fully displaced.
Okay, so even though it might take some time and it is competition, which is always good for everyone, hopefully in the long run, there are ports coming online and on stream in East Africa now. What do you think the implications are for the larger East African economy? Kenya is the largest economy in East Africa. The DRC also recently joined the East African community. And of course, you mentioned that and the access China might be looking for in terms of the minerals there. So with more of these ports coming on stream, what do you think the implications are for the larger East African economy?
Well, there's the opportunity to do more trade, but unfortunately, there's also some level of fatigue, with infrastructure fatigue. The current administration over the last 10 years has really pushed the infrastructure agenda, which has been tied to high debt levels. The public debt levels, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, are quite high. So there is some sort of fatigue with pushing the infrastructure narrative a bit further. And I think that might be a big barrier, particularly as we approach elections, as the new administrations come up. They're trying to really win themselves off that public debt and really try to push money into social programs, health, education, things that people feel have been neglected. So I do feel that infrastructure narrative, in as much as it's true that there is an infrastructure gap, I do feel it will meet a lot of headwinds running into the political space.
True. All right, Ken, before I let you go, we've seen the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Economies are trying to recover, and then we're now also hit with the Russia-Ukraine situation as well, and the stretched global supply chains. How is that in particular affecting the shipping industry in East Africa? What do you think the outlook for the sector is towards the end of 2022?
I think there are two types. There is what we would call the passenger services really going into Tanzania, tourists coming in. I think Tanzania was particularly hit hard with the tourist business going down, the cruise liner business. But I think when it comes to goods and services, that has also been disrupted. You remember we import a lot of our wheat from countries like Russia, Ukraine. It's only this week that those pathways have been opened up. And so there has been a slowdown to that effect. And also during the COVID pandemic, the car manufacturing industry in Japan, where Kenya imports a lot of cars from, really slowed down. So there was a huge backlog, and car prices, ordinary Toyotas right now are going for almost 50% of their cost up. So I think there's been a huge backlog. The pent-up demand has been huge. And I think the demand at the port to process faster to what they call the throughput. I think there's been called for more efficiency because of that pent-up demand that has created a huge backlog. But I do expect as we approach 2023, those backlogs to start clearing off.
All right, Ken Gichinka, thank you so much for joining me from Nairobi, Kenya. We'll be looking at this because competition, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, there are so many ways that all of the continent can also benefit from some of the activities happening in East Africa. Thank you for your time.
Many thanks.
And we'll keep an eye on things there because, as they say, it's competition, or rather steel that sharpened steel. So when there's competition, services oftentimes do have to improve as those who have been in business try to keep up with those bringing new innovations and new ways of doing things. You're watching Business Edge. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, we'll take you to the international business scene to see what the business stories there are. We'll also be landing in Nigeria, where some rumblings in the banking industry are pointing to the possible sale of one distressed bank. And from there, the conversation will come back to the African continent. Have you taken a loan from a loan app? You might need to beware of their tactics. We'll get into all of that after this.